My name is Joseph Gelman, Yosef Gelman. I live in Jerusalem, Israel, but I was born in the United States in Charleston, South Carolina. I had maternal grandparents. My mother's father and mother were both born in Kaluzhin, which we called when we were kids Kalushin, in the way that the Jews called the community. Kalushin was very, very much a part of our existence, 6,000 miles away or 5,000 miles away. In Charleston, South Carolina, many, many people from Kalushin came to Charleston, really beginning, I believe, in about 1895, plus or minus, but it continued and intensified just after World War I. I believe that in Eastern Poland, just after World War I, there was a lot of hunger and other issues as well. And that drove many, many people, and I understand it was a period of immigration, not only of Jewish people from Poland, but also of Polish non-Jews who are now part of the Polish-American community in the United States. But there were issues just after World War I with pogroms, with starvation, hunger, and people tended to leave. In that period, 1920 approximately, my grandmother and my grandfather moved to the United States separately. They married in the United States. Two people from Kalushin married in Charleston, South Carolina. My mother was born in 1923. My mother had a clear consciousness of her Kalushin origins, despite the fact that she never ever came to Poland. In addition, I would say that when I say that part of our childhood involved a consciousness about Kalushin, we, for example, I remember receiving mail from an organization called the Kalushina Society. There was a local organization of Kalushin, former Kalushin Jewish residents, which formed ostensibly to help one another, to be the type of organization that, that when people needed some sort of assistance, gave assistance to them, as well as what we would call today a support group. So that's really the background that's most relevant to the questions that I think that you want to talk about mostly, and that is the Kalushin project. But that's my background, and that's the background for my interest in the project. I would say that the consciousness that we were, our roots are in Kalushin, that is something that's accompanied me all of my life. I didn't come to Poland until a late date. Really, my first trip to Poland was in 2007. And the person who led the trip was a friend of mine. And he asked me beforehand where my family came from. And I told him, my father's family was from the Ukraine. My mother's family is from Kalushin, Poland. And as a surprise to me, when we left Warsaw one day, heading actually up north, we took the route that passed through Kalushin, stopped in Kalushin, and we began to ask people, and our Polish tour guide was helpful in speaking to people and asking them, where's the Jewish cemetery? We asked where the Jewish cemetery was, and was pointed exactly to it. And we found a field with no matzevot, no indication really that it was a cemetery. And I would say that on that day, all of my Kalushin background came into play in the sense that I began the process of reaching the decision that this was a situation that could not stand, that we have to do something to memorialize the location of a former cemetery in which my ancestors are buried, as well as the ancestors of many friends of mine growing up. because, as I said, in Charleston, South Carolina, there were a fair number of people who originated in Kalashin.
And what was, so you came first time in 2007, yeah?
Correct.
So what was your image of the Kalashin when you were growing up, and even, I mean, later, what was the image?
Right. I would say that when I think about it, when I think about Kalushin, I think about it as you would think about any shtetl. You think about dirt roads. There's a story about my grandmother walking from Kalushin to Warsaw with her sister, thinking of probably fairly primitive surroundings that were characterized many areas of the world, not just Poland, of the world, back in that time, in the turn of the century, the turn of the 1900, 1910, 1915. That was my image of it. It was an image of wooden structures, dirt roads, and a fairly agricultural and primitive orientation, I would say. And when I saw it, you look at a town, and you see agricultural elements. It was clear to me that much had changed, and then it didn't at all look like what I had in mind. But when I think about Kalushin, I think about I have such an active relationship with the town as it is today. Just this morning, I met with the mayor of Kalushin. Have such an active relationship with that town that I really see it in two ways. One, the way that Kalushin and many shtetl used to be, and the way it is, in fact, today.
But you said, yeah, that there was some community of Kalushiners in that place where you were living. Was there any kind of connection to contemporary that day Kalushin? Was there any kind of connection to Kalushin in the 50s? I mean, some relatives. Were there some kind of?
Right. To the best of my knowledge, there were no Jewish survivors living in Kalushin after the war. That actually, there were some that came back, I believe, to the area, but nobody stayed, I don't think. And to the best of my knowledge, just after World War II, there was a very small amount, number of people that came back. I can think of only one family that came to Charleston, South Carolina after World War II. All of the immigration was actually before that, well before that. And I don't think there was any contact whatsoever with Kalushin in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and beyond. I only remember two people from the community in the period of time when Poland was under Soviet influence. Only remember two people who came to Kalushin to see what there was to see. And they were both people who had strong roots to Kalushin, but you almost didn't expect very much. First of all, because Poland to us then was a closed society that you couldn't enter because of the communists. So it wasn't really a place that anyone traveled to. Secondly, many of the people who left Kalushin obviously left there under very difficult circumstances, and were not interested at all in looking back. They didn't have a tendency to idealize life before they immigrated to the United States. And so as a kid, it wasn't somewhere where I would naturally be very much interested in visiting. It was only much later in life when I realized I wanted to get a better picture on Poland in general, and it wasn't even my initiative to go to Kalishin. It was my friend who was leading our group. It was his initiative, but it wasn't until very, very later in life that I really wanted to understand what Jewish life was in Poland before the war, during the war, and also after the war. I guess my curiosity on that score increased over time.
But what kind of image of Kalushin then your grandparents passed to you? Was it, let's say, idyllic, positive, or it was what kind of image it was?
I would say negative. My grandfather didn't speak about it, but from what I understood from my grandmother, it was maybe too difficult of an experience to tell to a child.
But what did they told you, for example, some stories connected with emigration, or how they, moving to America, they were telling you such kind of things?
A little bit, but only small pieces. And it's interesting you ask that question, because I'll tell you the truth. I so very, very much regret not asking my grandmother a million questions. She, in the later years of her life, she lived with us, and I would have had an opportunity, but as a kid, our head was not there. We weren't into that, into getting information about those types of topics, and we tended not to necessarily look back at the history of our grandparents in a way that I truly, truly regret on a regular basis, that I simply didn't talk to them and get lots and lots of information, because, as you know, today that information would be of great, great significance to me on many, many different levels.
How do you think your grandparents, let's say, melt into American society, and did they have some kind of specific, I don't know how to say, specific things that would connect them with Poland, like, I don't know, kitchen or the way of behavior or speaking? Did they speak fluently English? And
right, so they spoke English. I spoke to them in English. Both my mother's father and mother spoke to each other and to their children in Yiddish. I don't know the extent to which they spoke Polish fluently, although I can imagine that my grandmother certainly had and grandfather certainly had a understanding of Polish. It was a subject that didn't really come up. They didn't dwell on Poland either. They were very, I would say that, like many of the immigrants to America, as soon as they hit the shore of America, as soon as they arrived in the United States, they were highly, highly motivated to improve the standard of living of their children. Not so much themselves. They liked what they liked, I assume, but their focus was their children, and when I saw the way that my grandmother in particular, because my grandfather passed away when I was 12 years old, and so it was my grandmother thus that I had most experience from, when I saw the way that she reacted to any measure of success of her grandchildren, it was a realization of perhaps this is a person who felt as though she had a very, very difficult life. Her family who stayed in Poland, by and large, were killed by the Nazis. Not all. She did have some relatives that got out, but by and large were killed by the Nazis. And it was her possibly, and I'm speculating, but I suspect it really was her view of life that she managed to, by her actions, build a family in the United States and ensure survival and ensure continuity. That's probably the way I feel, the way she looked at things, and it's certainly the way I feel she looked at things. And if I were her, I think I would view it in the same way. I was born in the United States, but I wanted to live in Israel, and in fact moved to Israel 35 years ago. All of our children were born in Israel, and I believe that I've contributed to continuity on a Jewish level of our family by having done so. I suspect she thought something very, very similar and very, very parallel. When she arrived in the United States, both of my grandparents, I don't believe they ever left the United States. They never left, they never visited Israel, for example. They were proud, but they never visited Israel. They really were situated in the United States. I would say that that was a time in life when people didn't travel the way they travel today. No one then would get on a plane and fly as we do when you have a business meeting in New York to fly there for 48 hours. Nobody would do that then. It just wasn't done. So the possibilities were less then. But still, it's interesting that they landed in the United States approximately 1920 and never left.
Mm-hmm. But what was their background? Like you said a little about the grandmother's family. What you know about their families, and were they, like you said that in Kaushiners they were like progressive Judaism, yeah? They were not like traditional in United States, how I understand.
I think that my mother's family was traditional, Orthodox, but they were, I would say that when they were in Poland, they were probably closer to a modern variety of Orthodox Judaism than the sort of stricter, what we call today Haredi version of Judaism. But what I know about them is not a lot. I know that my grandmother's sister was killed in Treblinka. I know that her parents died and most likely are buried in the cemetery that we are working on in Kalushin now. But again, it wasn't a situation that I had asked all the questions and knew all the answers. To give you an example, I needed to find out approximately when burials began in the cemetery that we're involved in. There is a second location of a Jewish cemetery in Kalushin today. The town hall is built on top of it. The municipality building is built on top of it. And so it doesn't really exist today. But I would say that when we were trying to find out when burials began, excuse me, I called a friend of mine in Charleston, South Carolina, and asked him to ask his mother because she would know. My grandparents were at that point not alive. I asked if he would find out the information from his mother. He told me his mother was a bit confused, but he would call his aunt in Atlanta, Georgia, and he did. And the answer came back to me that they switched from the old cemetery to what we call the New Jewish Cemetery in approximately 1900. So I didn't even have that level of information from my grandparents because I didn't ask the questions.
Yeah, I can imagine. And can you just name them?
Sure. The family that I got, well, the family that I got in touch with were the Popowskis, and that's a name that is known both in Kalushin as a family. It was known then, in any event. They were family within Kalushin. I believe they also had relatives. There was a Popovsky family in Minsk that's about 12 kilometers away from Kalushin. My family's name, my grandmother's maiden name before she got married was Midzaretsky, and my grandfather's name was Toporek. And the grandmother was Yehudit Midzaretsky, later Toporek, and my grandfather was Elazar Toporek. In the United States, they went by the names Louis Toporek, Elazar, close, I guess, to Louis. That's the name they adopted. And my mother, Yehudit, my grandmother, sorry, Yehudit, became Edith Toporek.
So you were growing up in what kind of, from the point of view of Jewish identity, what kind of home?
Right. I would say I was growing up in a home of intense Jewish identity. My father received rabbinical ordination from Yeshiva University in New York. My mother was born in Charleston and went to school and then went to work in New York for a short period of time and met my father. And they got married in Atlantic City. At that point, my father was close to finishing his rabbinic ordination. And so the home that they built was a home with, I would say, very, very intense and deep Jewish roots and feeling. So we grew up with a high level of consciousness. And the three children that came out of that home, my brother, my sister, and myself, I'm the youngest. The three of us are very, very similar, very close to what we came out. What we saw in our home is very, very close to what we practice in our own homes.
But it was for you obvious, like you had this feeling that you are, like, you know, Polish Jew, or not?
I would say I had a feeling that my origins were in Kalushin.
What it meant then, like in this context?
Right. It's hard to say because it had some meaning in my own mind, but I'm not certain that what I believed in my own mind is actually connected to reality. It wasn't until later in life, by the way, that I really understood a lot about not only Kalushin, but so many other shtetl in Poland on many different levels. They were very, very pluralistic societies. You sometimes, when you hear people talk about a shtetl, you think that everybody spent their day either praying or milking a cow, right? And that's not the case, certainly not in the 19th century. I mean, there was influence of socialism, there was influence of the Bund. There were people in all of these shtetl, or most or all, that were not religious, and that wasn't the way of life that they were interested in. On the other hand, all of these shtetl, certainly in Eastern Poland, had, again, all or most, had a strong representation of Hasidic Jews. And the Hasidic Jews bring a different different atmosphere to anywhere they go, and I say that in a positive sense. And so it was pluralistic in the sense that Kalashin had representation of all sorts of groups within Judaism. There are pieces, though, of Kalashin that I don't understand completely. I don't, and I continue to read, but the problem is that not much is necessarily written, and certainly in English. It would actually be helpful if I had better access to Polish books, because my suspicion is that there's more out there to be read. Subjects, for example, of Jewish-Polish relations within Kalushin. We certainly know when relations erupted and there were problems. We know more about that, but what we don't know is we don't know, specifically with respect to Kalushin, I don't know what happened on a day-to-day basis, what the interaction was, what the relationships on a business level were. The family that I mentioned, Popowski, who I called to ask his mother, then we got the information from his aunt about the use of the cemetery. So his grandfather was David Rose, Roja, I believe it was. David Popowski is named for his grandfather, David Roja, who was the owner of the mill in Kalužin. And that family, for example, because unlike my situation it was my grandparents were from Kalushin. David Popowski's situation was that his parents were from Kalushin. I suspect that he would be a good source of information, but I haven't actually, other than to pick up the phone and talk to him for a few minutes here and there, we haven't together related to this issue in depth either. But that we can still do.
Because I'm interested, you said that you went there obviously because of political reasons it was possible, but only at 2007 to Kalushin. And I would like to ask you when your real interest in Kalushin emerged, and I would like also to ask in the context of your education, do you have any kind of professional life connection with that kind of historical heritage or topics, or you are from, what is your education?
Right.
Professional.
Right. So I'm a lawyer. I have a bachelor's degree in political science, a master's in journalism, and a law degree, which in the United States is called Juris Doctor, degree in law. I'm a practicing lawyer. I have in my practice no relationship whatsoever to Kalushin or any of the types of issues that in Kalushin. It's simply personal interest, which is time intensive and well developed, but it's still personal interest. So in that sense, I don't have any professional connection to it. When I began to be conscious of it, I would say that I always had the level of consciousness that I described to you. It was a clear level of consciousness that we are from Kalushin. But it was only when I actually saw it did the spark ignite. At that point, something lit up inside of me, and I just said to myself, something needs to be done. The friend of mine who was the leader of our group and really took us to Poland was an educator in Israel who spent really almost from the moment that Poland opened up after the communist era left, he began bringing high school groups to Poland, and he was really an innovator in bringing high school groups from Israel. He was tremendous encouragement to me. in pursuing the interest that I had. And I guess if I had to describe to you, it was a spark that was lit in 2007, and as it ignited and became stronger, I just realized that there is no reason that a plot of land that we know as a Jewish cemetery shouldn't be properly marked as a Jewish cemetery. And there were obstacles. There were issues and there were obstacles along the way. But my guiding light was that something needs to be done. We can't leave this situation standing as it is today in 2007. And that's what motivated me.
So can you tell about this project? Yeah, what you started to do?
Right. So I began to talk to this friend of mine who took us, had some information about organizations in Poland that could be of help. I spoke to other people who had been in Poland and had some sort of relationship with cemeteries in Poland. And I asked them for information. And I would say that the two initial contacts that I had were the Foundation for Preservation of Jewish Heritage in Poland, and a woman by the name of Monica Krawczyk, who is the CEO or the director of the foundation, and Rabbi Shudrich, Rabbi Michael Shudrich, the chief rabbi of Poland. They were my two first contacts, and at a certain point, I believe it was October of 2007. In other words, the year didn't go out until I began to act. I was in Poland in May, and in October 2007, I came back to Poland with meetings scheduled with both the foundation and with Rabbi Shudrich to begin to advance the project and to understand how and what we needed to do and how to do it. At the point that I got involved, if you were to look up the real estate records and look to see who the owner of the property was, the owner of the property was the country of Poland. It was the Ministry of Finance of Poland. And the information that I have as to why that was is that there was a rule that was in effect that according to which if no funeral occurred in a cemetery over a period of 20 years, the property then reverted back to the government of Poland. And that's what had happened. However, under the law that came in effect during the wake of the years just after the communist period ended, enabling claims to be put in for Jewish communal property, in fact, a claim had been put in for that property, as well as several others in Kalushin. And so it opened the door for us to pursue that claim and to cause the project, to cause the property to be properly registered in the name of a Jewish organization. That's exactly what we did. That took a number of years. And once the property was registered, then we were ready to start the efforts of really building a monument. I'll go back in time again and say that in the period around 2009, we realized that we had to do georadar testing on the site to make determination of where the graves were, to the extent that technology enables you to get an idea. We did that and did preliminary work in order to sort of pave the way for ultimately putting up a monument. The time to put up a monument, for a variety of reasons, but was ripe in 2017, and that's when we built it.
And so we are talking about that cemetery where there is a building of, yeah?
No, the old cemetery is the town hall is built on it. The new cemetery is the one which is on the Warsaw Highway. It's the highway that goes, say, between Warsaw and Siedlec. And the front of the cemetery literally fronts on the highway. It's that which was an open field with a lot of trees and overgrown area and brush and bushes and things like that. But that's the cemetery that we went to work on and put the monument up. And we're not finished. We have a lot of work ahead of us, actually.
But are there any matsevas on that cemetery?
Right, there are none. What happened was during the war, the Nazis removed all of the matsevot that were there. I believe that the story is a typical story, that the Nazis themselves didn't do it. They forced the Jews to do it. Forced Jews to take down some or all of the matsevot that were there. Some may have been ground down, but by and large they were taken and moved to a landing strip just across from near Minsk Mazovietsk, and they were used to form the foundation of a landing strip for planes to land on during the war. I understand, but this is not. This information is information that I've heard that after the war they were removed and they are no longer there. Recently, I heard, however, and I'll be addressing this issue with people who will know the answer. Recently, I heard that there may be some left at that landing strip that are still visible. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what condition they might be in. Having said that, and to give a full answer to your question, there are fragments of matsevot that we are aware of and are being held for us to incorporate into the fabric of the reconstructed cemetery. When I say reconstructed cemetery, we're not going to put up matsevot because we don't have any Chevra Kadisha records telling us who's buried where. But what we are going to do is, in addition to the large, I would say rather majestic looking monument that exists today, we're going to put up some additional installations there as monuments to the people who, from Kalushin, for example, who died at Treblinka. We have approximately 5,000 names. The plan is to put those names onto a matseva of sort. Not exactly a matseva, but a structure. As well, we have other plans to mark what we assume to be the mass grave, or one of the mass graves on the cemetery property as well. So we've got other things, other work that we need to do in that cemetery, which will take place.
And can you tell me what was from the beginning a response of how do you feel, what was the reaction of local, let's say, society in Kalushin, inhabitants, how they reacted to all that? Also, I'm asking about the government. Were they
Right.
supporting you, or?
Right. You have to, I'll answer the question completely, but let me start by saying that everyone addresses a problem from his or her own perspective. And people have different interests. Sometimes you consider those interests to be legitimate. Sometimes you consider those interests not to be legitimate. People have different interests. The initial issues that came up were involved an attempt by the city to expand the road, one of the roads, in a way that would take off part of the cemetery. But that went to hearing in the appropriate judicial bodies in Poland, and it was ultimately resolved that the vast majority of that area that they wanted to take was not taken. It was left as part of the cemetery. That was a concern for me during the process, because I wanted the cemetery to be as whole as possible. And I set out on this project to give honor to the memory, not to desecrate graves. So this was a great concern to me. The issue was resolved in the courts, in the judicial bodies. It might have been an administrative proceeding, but it was resolved in Poland, and it stands as it is. That, as I mentioned, the cemetery is completely intact except a small part that was in fact expropriated or taken by the city to be used. Having said all that, what I would say is that the cooperation that I've received from the city of Kalushin and from the Catholic Church representative, the priest of Kalushin, since we've put up the monument, and it's critical that I say since, and I'll explain why. The amount of cooperation has been phenomenal. It's astounding to me. I'm coming from a meeting that took place in the Chief Rabbi's office today, in which the mayor of Kalushin and his assistant and the director of FODGE, the foundation, and myself were present, trying to resolve additional issues dealing specifically with that road issue. But everything today is being handled with extreme cooperation, and with the assistance of the town, I believe. I construe what they're doing for us to be real assistance and cooperation, and not just passive cooperation, actual cooperation. And I'm grateful for the consent or blessing that we've got from the religious authorities there, from the priest as well. I'm grateful because that, I think, makes the community feel as though everything is being done in a way that's in accordance with what Kalushin views itself as. Now, the reason I say since we put up the monument is because apparently over the years, a number of people have mentioned that they're going to put up a monument in Kalushin, and a number of people have made efforts to put up monuments, but at a certain point, maybe they were unable, or they lost interest, or they dropped the matter. I don't know, and I don't even know who they are, but people in Kalushin have mentioned them to me, and I guess there was some skepticism.
But they were from Kalushin or from...
No, from abroad, from somewhere abroad. And I don't know if I don't know who they are, so I don't know really how to describe this. But the people in Kalushin were troubled by the fact that projects were mentioned and then dropped, and nobody did any follow through. So when I came on the scene, they were skeptical. They didn't know whether I would follow through, or I would just be another person that came, showed interest, and then left. But once we showed the community, I believe, the mayor, the priest, everyone, that we actually put up a monument, and I think it's a beautiful monument. They from that point in time on have been very helpful to me, and so I'm very, very grateful for that. And I believe that when the leaders of the community, the secular leader of the community, the mayor, and the religious leader of the community, the priest, set a certain tone to the relationship, the community understands. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, so, but the question is, because this is the question in general in Poland about the Jewish cemeteries that are that was gained back by the Jewish community. Yeah, because this is FODGE. You have mentioned that, Lord.
Right.
So so that property rights came back to the Jewish community. And now the question starts, you know, who should take care of that? If because the local, you know, local government or people would say this is not our property now. So my question is, from very practical level, who is taking care of that place now? Is that Foch or is that Caution government?
Right. So first of all, Joseph, I have to tell you that you are asking extremely timely questions. Very, very timely questions. That was a subject that one of the subjects that we were dealing with today, and that's the subject that I dealt with when I met with the mayor a month ago. On May 7th, the mayor and I met in Kalushin. He and I discussed that issue as well. The concern of my group, and in a moment I'll tell you a little bit about my group when I say we, who we are. The concern is that we need to have enough funds available to ensure the maintenance for a period of time going into the future. And that is exactly our plan. We haven't yet decided whether it's going to be a Kalushin municipal company that we pay, that's a company that the municipality works with, or whether it's going to be an outside company. We haven't, we don't have those details yet, although we have at least in one case already solicited a bid for the cost of doing the project. And what we're looking for is two things. We're looking for a initial cleanup of the property. Bear in mind that it hasn't been cleaned up for a long, long time. We're looking for an initial cleanup that would involve removal of bushes. It's a cemetery, so we can't dig down. It has to be cut with a chainsaw of some sort. So we need that, and we need, it's about, I get 3 or 3.5 hectares of property needs to be mowed and put into a reasonably good situation as a first-time effort. And then probably every September and every May, we need a similar process of sort of going through and doing the updated maintenance. And we're dealing with those issues. We're aware of those issues. We are not interested in abandoning the property once we went through all the process of interesting many people, getting people involved, getting the community involved on a certain level as well. We're not interested in abandoning it, and we're not interested in leaving it in an unkempt situation. I have to say also that the mayor is personally interested that that property look appropriate, and he has stressed that to me, and I understand him, and I understand that it's something that we are undertaking. I told him today that of the several aspects of the project that we have in front of him, in front of ourselves to complete, the maintenance is the number one issue, which we're dealing with right now.
Because for me, I mean, it's quite obvious that this is from one hand very, very practical issue, but from the other hand, under that practical issue, it's the other kind of moral, ethical issue. That I think when the local community or government starts to take care of it, I mean, they can start to think about that as their own heritage. This is what I think what we are all trying to come to, that point that they will include it maybe again, I don't know, yeah, to their own vision of what Caution is and Caution heritage, yeah. And
no, I agree with you, and that is certainly the goal.
Yeah.
But in the short run, which is not so short, I think we need to make sure that we've got the means to do it.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you can. It's hard enough to impose your morals on yourself. and it's impossible to impose your morals on someone else. People have to come around and realize that that's part of them, that they need to do it for themselves, for their own moral reasons. And I'm not sure we're there yet, but we're at the beginning of a process. It's true that everyone in Kalushin, if you asked them where the Jewish cemetery was 15 years ago, they would have told you where it was. But today it's part of their existence. It really is. We're at the beginning of this process of encouraging the community to feel a part of this aspect of their past. And I believe that we have a good chance of succeeding at doing that. And I think you're quite right that only if we succeed will, in 50 years, 75 years, will that cemetery area be properly trimmed and properly kept. Because in that period of time, we certainly will have wanted to reach a situation where everyone realizes that Jews and Poles alike, that it's the presence of that memorial and the beauty of it and the other things that we will put on that property is something that Kalushin should look at as part of its historical tradition. I agree with you.
I mean, that's because I think there's this quite a paradox. I mean, because before let's say before political transformation, there were not so many descendants of Polish Jews coming back to these local places. And then when you would look from the local perspective, this is what I have when I'm somewhere. I have very often possibility to talk with some local societies or whatever, and explain them that there is no community that could take care of that cemetery. There is no Jews, so they cannot take care of it. So we have to take care, yeah. Right. And then from the beginning of 90s, you start to appear, in fact, in Poland, yes. So this is what I'm thinking now. This is my free thinking that for them sometimes it's like thinking, okay, so they are descendants of the Jews, so they can take care of it. So why we should? Yeah, I mean this is the kind of. But of course, this is the all that this is what you do to overlap again, yeah.
Right.
But there is that moment of hesitation, and this is that kind of straight, like let's say farmer thinking, very practical. So there is the owner. If I'm owner, okay, I will take care of it. If somebody is the owner. So I'm not the owner, but of course that's the like mental ethical issues. But you said about who is participating in this project, in that
right.
project?
So in the beginning of the project, we solicited some contributions. And received contributions that enabled us to get through the first part of the project, which was really the georadar testing and things associated with that in the initial stages. But as we reached the point in time where we wanted to create the monument, that's when a gentleman by the name of Ed Goldberg, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, had been in contact with me, and he, excuse me, he is my older brother's age, and I knew his family, but I didn't, many members of his family in Charleston, South Carolina, but I didn't exactly recall him, and he made contact with me. He visited Israel. We met in Israel once or twice, and he really wanted to get involved in this project with me. And really miraculously, it was at about the time that we decided that we needed to raise some money. And so Ed joined hands with me and became really a partner with me, and began fundraising mostly among friends and family, but some of it led to other people becoming involved, and a group sort of galvanized. A group got together of people who had probably, I would guess, about 30, 35 people who contributed to the project. And of that 30, 35, I think it was about 15 people who came to Poland in September of 2017. Some of us knew each other, some of us didn't know each other, but we all sort of organized together. Email was fabulous in that sense. It got everybody on the same page on many, many issues. We arranged to stay in 2 hotels in Warsaw. Only one of the group stayed in a B&B in Old Town, but everyone else was in 2 hotels. And we organized through the Taube Foundation a Warsaw tour. We had a bus and a tour guide one day. And then the following day, which was Thursday, September 14th, 2017, we had the ceremony in Kałużyn. So that's the core group is basically Kałużyn descendants who came together for the purpose of putting together this monument, and is in many ways somewhat still in contact with each other. I would say a core group still is in contact, and the other people are not yet, but my view is when we have the next ceremony, they'll come back. My guess is they'll all come back, and more. And so there'll be even more interest. I, for example, was in Warsaw and Kałużyn in May, as I mentioned, and I updated the group as to what was going on. And when I returned, I sent a detailed meeting report to 2 members of the group, 2 very key members of the group. So people have been kept in the picture, and it's a group of people from the United States, Israel, UK, that have all become friends through this project, really. And that's the group that continues to support the project.
And I know that it's a difficult question, but what are the, I mean, maybe not, but what are the, how you would describe the motivations of you and, I mean, the other people?
Right. It's, first of all, people take certain things from their childhood, and when you take a feeling that your family once belonged to a particular place, lived in a particular place, somehow there's a warm feeling in your heart for some aspects of that place, at least. And a cemetery tends to bring that out in everybody. When you know that the chances are almost 100% that your two of your great-grandparents are buried, and there's not a single matseva, you know that you just can't let that situation stand. When you look around and you see that the property, had it stayed unregistered in the name of Jewish hands, it could have been sold, you don't know, to someone who didn't know what the property was. You had no idea or no control as to what would happen to it. There's just a feeling deep down that you know that's wrong. It would be wrong for me not to react to that. It would be wrong for me to stand on cemetery land knowing I've got ancestors who are buried there, and know that I'm doing nothing to respect the memory of those ancestors. I don't think it's an exclusively Jewish concept. But I know with Jews, it's very, very intense. In general, we're a small people. We're, numbers wise, we have never been great numbers wise. Death is significant to us on lots of levels. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we'd say lahavdil. Births are so important to us on a different level, but the life cycle is a critical thing for us. And when you see a lack of respect, or a potential lack of respect, or even interpret yourself of not having due respect for the past when you don't pick up and take care of a cemetery property, in a way you can't really necessarily easily live with yourself unless you justify, and we don't want to get into that.
Yeah, but this is, when we are talking about cemeteries, we are talking about that cycle, and this is the same in Christianity, in Catholic Church, and of course that this is the main, I call it mystery, why, because when we are, mostly Poland is, 99%, well, maybe it's not really 90%, but let's say 50% religious Catholic society, where this, cemetery, it's anyway sacred place somehow, it doesn't matter if it's, maybe it matters, but if it's Catholic or Protestant or Jewish, why all these, a lot of Jewish cemeteries are just in that, and were after the war in that kind of, under that kind of treatment, and still they are, because this is in, in Catholic culture there is a, and religion, place of burial. It's a place also, that shouldn't be, desecrated, profanated. Right. And why it's all happened, in fact, yeah, all that, that Poles, Catholics, they took Macevas and other places from the cemetery. I cannot really understand this, because this is the root of, for every Catholic, the place where somebody is buried, it's a place, where there are some certain, let's say, rules. You cannot, it's a sacred place somehow, there is, and this is, I think, the main question about Poles, of course, and Polish society, and Polish culture as well, because there's a lot of cemeteries like that in Poland,
right,
and not only Jewish, German, right, or other places.
So. Look, I mean, you can, a person can make a concerted effort to improve his own sort of immediate vicinity, the things that are closest to him. And I think that's why obviously Kalushyn is close to me, and that's why I'm doing it. I can't speak for other people why they don't take the same approach to things that are close in their vicinity, but I can just say that as far as I was concerned, I just wanted to do what I knew was right, and I knew for me it was right to make every effort to make sure that the fact that is a cemetery is known, and to do whatever I could on the educational level. And we haven't spoken about it, but the educational level, and not just for the Israeli groups that are coming by and perhaps stop when they see a huge Star of David on a very, very large monument, Not just that, but also the educational element for the Polish people who come in contact with that as well. I have to say that at the ceremony on September 14th, I said to the history club, there was a history club of, I believe, 11th graders that came to the ceremony. My speech, which was really a half an hour speech about the history of Jews in Kalushin, particularly from the World War II period. My speech was translated into Polish for them, and they were able to follow it. I spoke to them before the ceremony, just a few words translated by a translator, and I said that their presence at that ceremony was, the most important thing for me, because I think that it has an educational impact in the community in general, and especially on the youth, if they learn something. And to me, as I said, that was so very, very important. But in general, look, I think that respect for the people who've departed this world is important for all of us. And I would encourage it, for all religions to really apply that. But I have to say that apart from it being morally right in my mind, apart from it being a religious mandate, apart from it being significant and obviously on the face of it a good thing, I have to tell you that it brings a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction. At the end of my days, when I look back on my life, this is a defining moment. The concept of taking care of a cemetery in Kalushin, in which lots of people, including my family, but the Jewish community of Kalushin is buried. It's a defining moment, and it's something I'll look back at and hope that it gave merit to my life, and I believe it did, and has and will continue throughout the project.
But how I understand, it's also because there's great value in itself that you gather that group, that you in this project you make these connections with other people, and
Yes.
This is not only about the, how I understand, cemetery itself.
Right.
Yeah, because you said about educational aspect. I want to ask about that. Did you have any other, educational, I don't know, events or activities, or did you have some contact with some, I don't know, NGOs, local, some historians? Or?
First of all, the answer in terms of other NGOs, yes, but not of tremendous materiality, not of tremendous significance. In terms of historians, one of my first stops in this project was at the JICH, at the Jewish Historical Institute, and that was in 2007 also, when I met with them and got information from them. I've also been in Shedlitz, for example, looking up records, trying to find family records as well. So there has been in that. We are in contact through the grateful assistance of your colleague. We're in contact with a local historian by the name of Emil Nowinski, who is a Kalushin resident and has a tremendous amount of experience on a proper academic level in terms of research on Kalushin Jewry. And so we're grateful for that as well. But I really I can't overemphasize. I mean, it's got to be, you know, said that the educational aspect of this, and the fact that you do bring in someone who's a historian, you do have a relationship, relationships that enable you to look at historical facts and understand them, and make them part of the process, part of the speech, part of the ceremony at Kalashyn is of course a critical aspect, because that's what people walk away from it with. We are hoping to do one of the projects that we want to do is a essay contest in Kalashyn. We initially thought we would do it just for students, but we may open it up to the community in general. A contest with obviously awards for the best essay on issues of either, it could be tolerance, it could be anti-Semitism, it could be Jews during the war, before the war, Jewish life in Kalashyn before the war. But we're actively focused on having an educational aspect to the project on an ongoing basis as well. That, to me, by the way, it's almost, we talked about maintenance. That's almost maintenance in a way. It's maintenance because it's, one is maintaining the physical beauty. The other one is maintaining the concept of tolerance and the Jewish history, the Jewish past of Kalashyn in people's minds over time. I mean, it is amazing that in 2007 that we were able to get off a bus, stop a woman in her 60s in Kalashyn, and ask her where the Jewish cemetery is, and she knows. Hadn't been at that point a matzeva there in about 60 years, probably 54, 55, 56 years, something like that. Hadn't been a matzeva there, yet she knew that that was a Jewish cemetery. Somehow that aspect was still in the minds of the people, which is, to me, quite amazing. And now we have another challenge, and that is to keep other aspects of the historical Kalashyn in people's minds. And we, I think, will be able to succeed on that also, because we have the cooperation, among others. We have the cooperation of the principal of the elementary school, Marek Paknik, in Kalashyn, to help us with that.
And what are your plans?
The plans right now are as follows, and I can really give it to you almost in order of priority. One is maintenance. Secondly is, in parallel, by the way, the essay contest. The essay contest is not really dependent on that, because it's just our own initiative. It's planned for September to begin, September 2018, to announce it with papers to be due whenever the judges decide, and we have a panel of 4 judges all arranged to review those essays in Polish. But in terms of, aside from that, the priority items are: 1, maintenance. Secondly, placing borders to the cemetery. Now, what do I mean by borders? And this is a little bit unusual. We don't want to close off the cemetery. We know cemeteries always have fences. We know they always have walls. We see them all over Poland, and we see them all over the world. There's a gate that you enter the cemetery in, and that's the way they work. We're not going to do that. We believe to fence it off and to put a border around it is to be exclusive. The message is, we want to exclude you. We don't want to include you. So we're not going to put a fence around the cemetery. What we're going to do is we're going to put L-shaped blocks on the 4 corners of the cemetery. And the talk is today that they are all told, they're about a meter by a meter. In other words, not a huge thing. We may put some bushes, but not for beautification, not to exclude. And we may put in the soil between L and L, between the two corners, say, we may put in the soil a small row of bricks, just to sort of show the boundary of the cemetery in a in a way that's not declaring we want to keep anybody out. So that's the next step after maintenance is that. The third step is to put what we call pillars or monoliths. They'll have the shape, the existing monument has the shape of it's a large monument. In the middle has an open space that's the shape of a keyhole. That keyhole is not really a keyhole, it's actually the artist's rendition of old wooden matzevot in Poland. When Jews used wooden matzevot because they simply didn't have the resources to be able to put up a marble or a cement matzeva, they would cut a piece of wood, and wood was in plenty in Poland. They would cut a piece of matzeva in the shape of a body and a head. And sometimes they would try to carve out the name of the person. And when the bottom of the wooden matzeva would begin to decay, they'd simply cut it off and push it back in. The current monument is built that way, with in the middle of the hole, the keyhole being the head and the body. We're going to take we're going to build simply the keyhole as a sort of a matzeva now. And we're going to put about 4 or 5 of them in various places. One of them will have the names, as I mentioned, the 5,000 names of the people who died in Treblinka, were murdered in Treblinka. Their names will be on one of them. A second one will be in the area where we believe the mass grave is located. A third one. The third one we haven't completely decided what the theme of that will be. The last one, however, and perhaps this will be closest to the monument, will be the same exact pillar. All 4 to 5 of them are the same, but it'll have a QR reader device, reader symbol on it. For kids who come, click with their iPhone on the device, and then they can get an audio file, either in English, Hebrew, or Polish, telling the history of the Jews of Kalashin in their iPhone or other device. The Polish version of that, the person whose voice will appear on that is the mayor of Kalashin, and he's already agreed to that. So that's the plan for now. In other parts of the city, we're planning on putting a marker in the location of the old cemetery, a marker in the town square, and a marker, hopefully, in what's now a petrol station, but the main synagogue of Kalashin was located there. And I would just say one thing that I haven't mentioned, that historically, the church in Kalashin, the Catholic Church, had a sort of a key role in the beginning of the war. Jews were basically punished by the Nazis for having taken an active part together with the Poles in fighting off the Nazis and pushing the Nazis out of Kalashin in the first days of the Nazi attack on Kalashin, which was really the second week of the war. Second week beginning around September 7th or 8th of 1939. In that week, there was already fighting going on in Kalashin, and Nazis were pushed out. When they came back in a couple of days later, they took their vengeance out on the Jews, and crammed a large number of Jews into the church and left them there for a long time without food, and with some water got in, but not much. At the end of that couple of day period, there were many Jews had died in the church, and not at all coincidentally, because the Nazis were very, very aware of the Jewish calendar. That was on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and they were literally in a church, and I believe that they were praying Rosh Hashanah prayers in that Catholic church. An incredible heavy experience, a very, very difficult experience to even think about. There was a priest in Kalashin, and I don't know the years of his tenure, but I know that in 1990 he somehow had access and received a matzeva from Kalashin, which is cracked in half and is not complete. But he took that matzeva and put it on the side wall, on the portal of the church. If you were walking in, it would be on your left, and he attached it to it with a metal attachment, so that at least one of the matzevot that we have, fragments of matzevot that we have, that is in fairly good shape, is attached to the side wall of the church. When you think about it, it's an incredible, incredible statement. And I have been in Poland a lot, and in a fair amount of Poland, north, south, east, and west. I've never seen anything. I don't know of any other church, Catholic church, that has a Jewish matzeva there. And that priest who did it, we tried to get in touch with him. He's in a old age home and is infirm and wasn't able to make it. We offered to bring him to the ceremony, but wasn't able to do it. But obviously he's not only has he memorialized the Jews of his community by putting that, saving that matzeva and putting it there, but I think my heart and feelings tell me that he is the one who sensitized the people of Kalashin to the significance of the Jewish presence in Kalashin. He's the one who, and it may not have been a popular move to do what he did, but may have not have, I don't know. But he did it, and it's an extremely, extremely sensitive thing that he did. And without even ever having met him, I'm thankful that that one matzeva is saved on a location that has such a powerful, powerful emotional position in the Jewish situation in Kalashin in the opening days of World War II.
Yeah, that's just incredible. I mean, even even now, but it was, you said, beginning of the 90s.
1990, yes.
It was, 1990. It was after Jedwabne.
Right.
So
right.
It was really a strong statement.
Wait, 1990 was after Jedwabne? It was after the controversy was later, though, I think.
You mean 1990?
Yeah, he put it in 1990. Jedwabne controversy was
1998.
Yeah. Yes.
Before, but does he? He's in a shape that you can talk with him now. Like
I didn't speak with him. One of the employees at Fudge made the efforts, because my instructions were to do everything we could to get him to the ceremony.
And where in which his elderly house? Yeah, somewhere.
In an old age home facility, or a facility for infirm, sick.
Because I think that would be really great to just to talk with him, just to make some audio recording or something. because this is incredible.
If you want me to try to get his information,
Yeah.
we have his name.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you, I would be really interested in that because this is something really unique. I mean, you know, if he's in a shape to just talk,
Right.
that would be great. Just to
I know. I
talk
agree.
with him a bit. So
I-
if you find some, contact to him, you have some.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay. The other thing. I mean, I think I've been careful. I've in saying when we talk about the memorial to the Jews of Kalashin that we put up, I try to stress that we were the second ones to do it. He was the first, because it's quite remarkable. Somebody told me that there's a piece of a matzeva inside a church in Poland somewhere that they've seen, one inside, but never welcoming everyone who walks into the church with the sad historical fact, as this priest sought to do so. But we'll take care of getting you the information.
Yeah, you should, because I think because the other case is probably that it was used as some kind of, that matzeva was used as some kind of just material,
And he saved it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to add something at the end? Something that should be said?
What I would like to say is that when you asked about the group, when I refer to the we that were working on the monument and who exactly they were, the one thing that's critical to understand that I feel it's important to add is that we've had a tremendous amount of assistance from Polish, non-Jewish Polish people who have helped us in just many ways along the process, and I am extremely grateful. There have been some of them who've become close friends of mine as a result, and it's important to me that that these people get that recognition. In Israel, we talk about, and I know the term is known here very well, certainly in the Polin Museum, the concept of Chasidei Umot HaOlam, of righteous Gentiles. But the people I'm working with are contemporary righteous Gentiles in my eyes. They are doing work which Judaism calls Chesed Shel Emet, which means kindness for the sake of kindness, because the people who we're doing this for, the people who are dead, can't come up and thank you. So it's really kindness that's being done, an act of chesed, an act of kindness, of righteousness, really, toward people who cannot thank you. These non-Jews who have been helping me have really do have the status of being righteous Gentiles in my mind, because of two things. One, because of the state of mind that they have, the desire that they have, and I've heard on numerous occasions, we will do anything we can do to help you. But for another reason as well, and that is that they've decided that this is important to them. They're their mindset is that there is something about this project that they need to participate in this project because it's important to them. And I am so very, very grateful to have that group of friends as well. And to them, I'd like to, I just like to recognize them. They, like so many good people in this world, don't ask for any recognition, don't ask for any credit. They just do what they do because they know that it's right to do. Thank you.
Thank you.